Easter Sunday at my childhood home should have been about family, celebration, and my mom's famous honey-glazed ham. Instead, I found myself staring at a dusty metal box my husband Jake had just pulled from behind old Christmas decorations in the attic. His face had gone completely white as he whispered those chilling words. When I saw what was inside that box, my entire world shattered. 27 years of lies, deception, and stolen dreams lay scattered across those yellowed documents. I didn't cry. I planned my revenge. The morning had started perfectly. Jake and I pulled into the circular driveway of my parents' sprawling Connecticut colonial at exactly 9:30, just as the church bells from St. Matthew's were finishing their Easter call to worship. The dogwood trees flanking the front walkway were in full bloom, their white petals creating a carpet of pristine beauty that matched my mother's carefully maintained garden. "Aspen, sweetheart," Mom called from the kitchen window, her voice carrying that particular blend of excitement and stress that always accompanied holiday preparations. Linda Walsh had been perfecting Easter dinner for 35 years, and she approached it with the precision of a military operation. Jake grabbed the bottle of wine Wed brought from the passenger seat. "Ready to charm your parents for another 6 hours?" he asked, squeezing my hand with that reassuring warmth that had drawn me to him 4 years ago. "Just remember, Dad's still convinced you married me for my inheritance money." I laughed, though the joke felt hollow. At 32, I was still paying off student loans while working as a marketing coordinator for a small nonprofit. Whatever inheritance Dad occasionally hinted at seemed like a distant fairy tale. The front door swung open before we could knock. Dad stood there in his pressed khakis and navy sweater, looking every inch the successful attorney had always been. Richard Walsh commanded respect in every courtroom in Fairfield County, but at home he was just the man who still called me his little princess. "There's my favorite daughter," he said, wrapping me in his familiar embrace that smelled of expensive cologne and morning coffee. "I'm your only daughter, Dad. That makes you extra special." He turned to Jake, extending his hand with that appraising look head never quite dropped. "Jake, good to see you again." Inside, the house hummed with familiar energy. Mom bustled between the kitchen and dining room, adjusting flower arrangements and checking her timeline for the meal. Everything gleamed under her meticulous care, from the polished hardwood floors to the crystal chandelier that caught the morning sunlight streaming through the bay windows. "Tyler's running late, naturally," Mom announced, checking her watch. "He texted that he's bringing his new girlfriend, Madison something. I made extra sweet potato casserole just in case. My younger brother's perpetual lateness was family legend." At 29, Tyler had finally finished graduate school and landed a decent job at a consulting firm in Hartford, but punctuality remained his weakness. "The house looks beautiful, Mrs. Walsh," Jake said, admiring the Easter decorations Mom had scattered throughout the living room. "Thank you, dear. Actually, since you're here early, would you mind helping Richard clear out some of the attic space? We're having contractors come next week to install new insulation, and I want everything organized before they start working up there." Jake's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm he always showed for home improvement projects. "Absolutely. I'd be happy to help." Dad looked pleased. Despite his initial skepticism about Jake, had slowly warmed to my husband's willingness to pitch in around the house. "Great. We can sort through some of those old boxes that have been collecting dust for years." An hour later, Jake and I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, armed with trash bags and labels for sorting. The space stretched across most of the house's footprint, filled with decades of accumulated memories. Christmas decorations occupied one corner, while my childhood furniture formed a miniature landscape near the dormer windows. "Look at this," I said, kneeling beside a plastic tub filled with my old school papers. My third-grade handwriting stared back at me from a carefully preserved Mother's Day card. Mom saved everything. Jake worked methodically through a stack of boxes near the far wall, sorting items into keep, donate, and discard piles. His systematic approach to organization was one of the things I loved about him, though it sometimes drove me crazy when he applied the same logic to deciding what to watch on Netflix. "Your parents have enough Christmas lights up here to illuminate Times Square," he called out, wrestling with a tangled mess of extension cords. I moved to help him, stepping carefully around loose floorboards that creaked under my weight. Together, we shifted a heavy wooden trunk that had belonged to my grandmother, revealing a space behind it that seemed oddly hollow. "There's something back here," Jake said, reaching into the gap between the trunk and the slanted roofline. His hand emerged holding a rectangular metal box, about the size of a shoebox but heavier. The surface was dulled with age and dust, and a small combination lock secured the lid. That's weird. I've never seen this before. I wiped the dust away with my sleeve, revealing scratched lettering on the top. It says Walsh Family Trust Documents. Jake's expression shifted as he examined the box more closely. The lock's broken, he said, and the lid opened with surprising ease. Inside, manila folders created neat compartments filled with legal documents, bank statements, and correspondence. Jake lifted the first folder, and as he read, his face underwent a transformation that made my stomach drop. The color drained from his cheeks. His hands began to shake slightly. He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, anger, and something that looked like fear. "Don't react," he whispered urgently, glancing toward the attic stairs. "Wait until your mom leaves." My heart started racing. "Jake, what is it?" He opened the folder wider so I could see. The top document was a will, dated 15 years ago, bearing my grandfather's signature in his familiar, shaky handwriting. My eyes scanned the text, struggling to process the legal language until one section jumped out at me. To my beloved granddaughter Aspen Marie Walsh, I bequeath the sum of $800,000 to be held in trust until her 25th birthday, at which time she shall have full access to the principal and any accrued interest. The world seemed to tilt sideways. $800,000. I was 32 years old. I'd turned 25 7 years ago, and I'd never received a penny. Jake pulled out another document, this one from First National Bank of Connecticut, dated just 3 months ago. It showed an account in my name with a current balance of $943,000, reflecting 7 years of investment growth. But the withdrawal records told a different story. Regular transfers, always authorized by Richard Walsh as trustee, had been moving money out of the account for the past 7 years. The amounts varied from $5,000 to $50,000 at a time, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. "Your father has been stealing from you," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "For 7 years." I stared at the papers, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what we'd discovered. This money could have paid off my college loans. It could have bought us a house. It could have changed everything about my financial future. But instead of grief or despair, what rose in my chest was something far more dangerous. Cold, calculating rage began to build as I realized the scope of my father's betrayal. From downstairs, Mom's voice carried up through the house. "Aspen, honey, Tyler just texted. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Can you come help me set the table?" Jake carefully closed the folder and placed it back in the box. "We need to go through everything here, but not now. Can you act normal?" I looked into his eyes, seeing my own fury reflected back at me. "I can act normal," I said quietly. "But this isn't over." As we made our way back downstairs, carrying the metal box carefully concealed in a bag of Christmas decorations, I felt the foundation of my family relationships cracking beneath my feet. But I also felt something else. The first stirrings of a plan. 20 minutes later, Tyler burst through the front door with his characteristic energy, bringing cold air and the scent of his aftershave into the warm house. Behind him walked a petite blonde woman who looked nervously around our family's formal living space. "Sorry, we're late," Tyler announced, kissing Mom on the cheek. Traffic was insane coming from Hartford. "Mom, Dad, this is Madison Porter." Madison stepped forward with a bright smile, extending her hand to Dad first. "Mr. Walsh, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Tyler talks about your family constantly." "The pleasure is ours," Dad replied, and I watched his face carefully for any sign of the criminal I now knew him to be. He looked exactly the same. Warm, paternal, completely trustworthy. The perfect mask. While the family gathered in the living room for pre-dinner conversation, Jake and I excused ourselves to put the Christmas decorations away in the garage. Really, we wanted to examine more of the documents we'd found. In the privacy of Dad's workshop, Jake spread the contents of the metal box across the workbench. What we discovered made my earlier anger look like a gentle annoyance. Bank statements going back 7 years revealed a pattern of systematic theft that was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Every month, sometimes twice a month, Dad had authorized transfers from my trust fund into various accounts. Some went to his business account at Walsh and Associates. Others went to personal accounts I didn't recognize. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to a series of transfers from 3 years ago. 50,000 in January, 30,000 in February, 25,000 in March. That coincides exactly with when your parents renovated their kitchen. I remembered that renovation. Mom had been so excited about the granite countertops and custom cabinets. Dad had mentioned it was expensive, but that business was good. Now I understood where the money had actually come from. But the truly devastating discovery came when Jake found a separate folder labeled Tyler Walsh Trust Fund. My brother's inheritance had been smaller, only $200,000, but Dad had been stealing from him too. "Tyler got some money last year," I said, remembering his excitement about finally being able to afford a decent apartment. "He told me Grandpa left him about 15,000. Jake compared the documents. According to this, his trust should have been worth 240,000 by now. Your dad gave him 15,000 and kept the rest. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Dad hadn't just stolen from me. Had robbed both of his children of their financial security, their futures, their ability to make choices about their lives. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Buried in the middle of the stack was correspondence between Dad and the bank's trust department. The letters grew increasingly concerned over the past 6 months, questioning the frequency and amounts of withdrawals, requesting additional documentation, and finally threatening a formal audit. The most recent letter, dated just 6 weeks ago, was written in the formal language of legal notification. The bank was launching an investigation into irregularities in the Walsh family trust accounts. Dad had 30 days to provide complete documentation justifying all transfers and expenditures. "Has been scrambling," Jake said, studying a folder full of hastily created receipts and invoices. "Look at this. Educational expenses for Aspen Walsh, $50,000. But there's no detail, no supporting documentation." I looked at the fabricated paperwork with growing amazement at Dad's desperation. Had been creating false records, trying to justify years of theft as legitimate trust fund management. The most damning evidence was a handwritten note in Dad's recognizable script, paperclipped to the bank's audit notification. It said, "Need to accelerate timeline. Move remaining funds before investigation begins. Consider offshore options." "Hes planning to steal everything," I whispered. "He knows Hes about to get caught, so Hes going to take whatever's left and run." Jake pulled out his phone. "We need to document all of this. Take pictures of everything." As I started photographing documents, my hands shaking with rage, I heard Mom calling from the house. "Aspen, honey, can you come help bring out the appetizers?" I forced my voice to sound normal. "Coming, Mom." But as we carefully repacked the evidence, I was already thinking ahead. Dad might be planning to steal the rest of my inheritance. But Hed made one crucial mistake. Hed hidden the evidence of his crimes instead of destroying it, probably because he needed the documentation to continue moving money. That evidence was going to be his downfall. "Can you keep acting normal through dinner?" Jake asked as we walked back toward the house. I looked at him, feeling a cold determination settling over me like armor. "I'm going to do more than act normal. I'm going to watch him, listen to him, and gather intelligence. By the time I'm done, he'll know everything about how he stole from us. And then I'm going to destroy him." The Easter dinner that followed was a surreal exercise in performance art. I sat across from Dad at the dining room table, complimenting Mom's honey-glazed ham and laughing at Tyler's stories about his consulting work, all while studying the man who had robbed me of 7 years of financial security. Every detail of Dad's lifestyle took on new significance. The expensive watch on his wrist, the casual mention of his golf club membership fees, the way he ordered wine at restaurants without looking at prices. All of it funded by money Hed stolen from his own children. But what disturbed me most was how comfortable he seemed. There was no guilt in his expression, no nervousness when Tyler mentioned money, no sign that he felt any remorse for what Hed done to us. As Madison told us about her work at a local bank, I caught Jake's eye across the table. We were both thinking the same thing. She might be exactly the ally we needed to understand the full scope of Dad's financial crimes. The Easter meal continued with its familiar rhythms, but underneath the surface, everything had changed. I was no longer Dad's little princess. I was his enemy, And he didn't even know it yet. After dinner, while Tyler and Madison walked through Mom's garden and Dad dozed in his recliner with the newspaper across his chest, I found myself alone with Mom in the kitchen. She was methodically wrapping leftovers in aluminum foil, humming softly to herself. This was my chance to test what she knew. "Mom," I said casually, drying dishes as she washed them. "Jake and I have been talking about buying a house, but with my student loans, it's going to be tight financially. I keep thinking about what Dad mentioned a few years ago about some kind of family money that might become available someday." Her hands stilled for just a moment in the soapy water. "Oh, honey, you know how your father is. He's always talking about future possibilities. But he specifically mentioned something about Grandpa's will. Something about money that was set aside for me." Mom's laugh sounded forced. "You know, sweetheart, your grandfather's estate was complicated. There were a lot of legal details that had to be worked out over the years." I pressed gently. "It's just that Jake and I are trying to plan our finances, and if there's something I should know about." She turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. "Aspen, honey, I think you might be misremembering some conversations. Your father handles all the financial and legal matters. If there was anything significant, don't you think you would have received it by now?" But there was something in her eyes that didn't match her words. A flicker of discomfort, maybe even guilt. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone light. "I guess I just got my hopes up." "You know," Mom said, her voice taking on a different quality, "your father has been under a lot of stress lately with work. The legal profession is very demanding. Sometimes I think people don't appreciate how hard he works to provide for all of us." The comment struck me as oddly defensive, especially since I hadn't criticized Dad at all. "Is everything okay with his practice?" "Oh yes, everything's fine. It's just that sometimes there are complicated cases, complicated financial situations that require a lot of attention to detail." As she spoke, her hands moved nervously, rearranging already perfectly organized items on the counter. "Mom," I said gently, "is there something you need to tell me?" For a moment, her mask slipped completely. I saw fear in her eyes, and something that looked like shame. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. "There's nothing to tell, sweetheart. Your father takes care of everything financial. I just focus on keeping the family together and the house running smoothly." But her voice carried a weight that suggested she was carrying secrets she wasn't ready to share. The conversation was interrupted by Tyler's laughter echoing from the backyard, where he and Madison were examining Mom's prize-winning rose bushes. Through the kitchen window, I could see them holding hands, their faces bright with the easy happiness of new love. "Tyler seems really happy," I observed. "Oh yes, Madison is a sweet girl. And so smart. She works for Connecticut Community Bank, you know. Very responsible position. What kind of work does she do there? Something with accounts and auditing, I think. She was telling me earlier about how she helps customers understand their investment portfolios and trust fund management." My pulse quickened. Madison worked in exactly the area that could help us understand Dad's scheme. That's interesting. Maybe I should ask her some questions about financial planning. Mom's expression tightened slightly. "Oh, I don't think you need to bother her with all that. You know how your father feels about discussing family financial matters with outsiders." The phrasing struck me as significant. Family financial matters, outsiders, as if there were secrets that needed to be protected. Just then, Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking refreshed from his post-dinner nap. "What are my two favorite ladies talking about?" "Just girl talk," Mom said quickly, and I noticed how she moved slightly closer to him, as if seeking protection. "Aspen was asking about financial planning," Mom added, and I caught the warning note in her voice. Dad's expression remained pleasantly interested, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Financial planning? That's my area of expertise. What questions do you have?" "Nothing specific," I said, matching his casual tone. "Jake and I were just talking about long-term goals. Well, you know I'm always here to help with any legal or financial questions. Family should stick together on these things." The irony was breathtaking. Here was the man who had stolen nearly $1 million from his children, offering to provide financial advice. "I appreciate that, Dad. Good. And Aspen." His voice carried a subtle emphasis. "You know that family business should stay in the family." We don't need to involve outsiders in our private affairs. The message was clear. Don't talk to Madison or anyone else about family finances. But as Tyler and Madison came back into the house, bringing fresh air and spring sunshine with them, I was already planning to do exactly the opposite. Madison, I said warmly, I'd love to hear more about your work at the bank. It sounds fascinating. Oh, it really is, she replied enthusiastically. I work primarily with trust fund administration and estate management. It's amazing how complex family financial situations can become over generations. I felt Dad's eyes on me, but I kept my expression innocently interested. That sounds like exactly the kind of expertise our family could use. Dad stepped smoothly into the conversation. Actually, we're all set with our family's financial management. I've been handling estate planning for 30 years. Of course, Madison said politely. Though sometimes families find it helpful to have an independent review, just to make sure everything is optimized for tax purposes and regulatory compliance. The room fell silent for a moment. Dad's smile never wavered, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. We appreciate the offer, he said finally. But as I always tell my clients, too many cooks spoil the broth when it comes to financial management. As we prepared to leave that evening, Mom hugged me goodbye with what felt like extra intensity. Remember what we talked about, she whispered in my ear. Some things are better left in the past. But as Jake and I drove home through the Connecticut countryside, I knew the past was about to catch up with my father in ways he couldn't imagine. The question was, how deeply was Mom involved in his crimes? 2 days after Easter, I called Tyler and suggested we meet for lunch. We chose a quiet restaurant in Hartford, far enough from our parents' house that we could talk freely. Tyler arrived looking happy and relaxed, still glowing from his successful introduction of Madison to the family. I think Mom really likes her, he said, settling into the booth across from me, and Dad seemed impressed when she talked about her banking experience. About that, I said carefully. What exactly did Madison mean when she mentioned trust fund administration? That's pretty specialized work. Oh, she's amazing at it. She manages accounts for families who have generational wealth, makes sure everything complies with legal requirements, watches for irregularities. She's actually working on a case right now where a family discovered their attorney had been embezzling from estate accounts. My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. Really? Yeah, it's apparently more common than people think. She says family members often steal from each other, especially when there's a lot of money involved and not much oversight. How would someone even discover that kind of theft? Tyler leaned forward, warming to the topic. Madison says there are usually warning signs. Unexplained lifestyle improvements, reluctance to provide account statements, missing documentation. She actually helped one family recover over $2 million that had been stolen by their own father. The parallel was so exact it felt like the universe was providing me with a roadmap. Tyler. Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. Tyler's face went through the same transformation Jake's had in the attic. Disbelief giving way to shock and then to rage. $240,000? He whispered, staring at the screen. He stole from me. He looked me in the eye and thanked me for being responsible with money and had stolen over $200,000 from me. There's more, I said gently, and showed him the documents related to my own much larger inheritance. Tyler sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing the magnitude of our father's betrayal. What do we do? He finally asked. We fight back, but I need to know if you're really with me on this, because once we start, there's no going back. Tyler's jaw set with a determination I'd rarely seen from my usually easygoing brother. Has been stealing from us for years while we struggled. I'm with you. Good. Then I want Madison to look at these documents. Professionally. Tyler nodded grimly. She'll be furious when she sees this. She takes financial crimes personally. That evening, the four of us met at Tyler and Madison's apartment. When Madison saw the documents, her expression shifted into professional mode. This is systematic embezzlement, she said flatly. And it's been going on for years. The pattern is textbook: regular withdrawals, falsified documentation, creation of fraudulent expenses to justify transfers. She spread the papers across Tyler's dining table like a prosecutor laying out evidence. The good news is that everything is well documented. Your father kept records of his crimes, probably because he needed them to continue manipulating the accounts. Can we get our money back? I asked. Absolutely. But more than that, this is criminal activity. Federal banking laws were violated when he moved money across state lines and created false documentation. This is going to prison. Tyler looked stricken. Prison? Has our father? Madison's voice softened. Tyler, he stole over $1 million from his own children. That's not a family dispute. It's a felony. She pulled out her laptop and began making notes. I'm going to need to involve federal authorities because of the interstate banking violations. The FBI has a white-collar crimes unit that handles exactly this kind of case. Wait, I said. Before we involve the FBI, I want to confront my parents directly. I want to hear what they have to say for themselves. Jake looked concerned. That might give them a chance to destroy evidence or move more money. Not if we do it right, Madison said slowly. If we coordinate with the bank to freeze the accounts first, then confront them, they won't be able to move any more funds. And sometimes a direct confrontation can lead to admissions that help prosecutors. Plus, I added, I want to know how deep Mom's involvement goes. She knows something, but I'm not sure how much. Madison nodded. That's smart. In cases like this, spouses are often complicit, but sometimes they're also victims. We spent the next 2 hours planning our approach. Madison would contact her supervisors at the bank to begin the process of freezing Dad's access to the trust accounts. Tyler and I would gather any additional evidence we could find. And then, armed with federal law enforcement support, we would confront our parents with proof of their crimes. One more thing, Madison said as we prepared to leave. In my experience, when people are caught stealing this much money, they often have more crimes they've been hiding. Your father might have been stealing from other clients as well. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made horrible sense. If Dad was willing to rob his own children, what was to stop him from stealing from elderly clients who trusted him with their estates? As Jake and I drove home, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. We were finally going to get justice, but the process was going to tear our family apart. Are you sure about this? Jake asked. I thought about the 7 years I'd spent struggling financially while Dad lived comfortably on money he'd stolen from me. I thought about Tyler working 2 jobs through college while hundreds of thousands of dollars sat in accounts Dad controlled. I thought about all the times Dad had lectured us about responsibility and hard work while he was secretly robbing us. I'm absolutely sure, I said. It's time for him to face the consequences of what he's done. The next morning, Madison called with news that chilled me to the bone. I contacted our fraud investigation unit about freezing the accounts, she said, her voice tense with excitement and concern. But Aspen, there's something else. When I ran your father's name through our system, flags came up on multiple accounts. What kind of flags? Has the trustee or attorney for at least 6 other family trusts managed by our bank. All of them have had irregular withdrawal patterns similar to yours. We're talking about millions of dollars in potential fraud. I felt dizzy with the scope of what she was describing. Has been stealing from other families too. It looks that way. My supervisor is bringing this to the FBI today. This isn't just about your inheritance anymore, Aspen. This is a major criminal enterprise. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Can you and Jake come over for dinner tonight? Your father has something important to discuss with you. The timing felt ominous. Had Dad somehow learned about our investigation? I called Tyler immediately. Had received the same invitation. This can't be a coincidence, he said. Something has spooked them. Madison, listening on speakerphone, agreed. In my experience, when criminals feel threatened, they either flee or they try to intimidate their victims into silence. What should we do? Go to dinner, she said. But be careful, and whatever happens, don't let them know what evidence you have. That evening, Jake and I drove to my parents' house with a growing sense of dread. Tyler and Madison arrived at the same time, and we all walked to the front door together. Dad opened the door with his usual smile, but there was something different in his eyes, something harder. Come in, come in. We need to have a family conversation. Mom stood in the living room, wringing her hands nervously. She looked like she'd been crying. Please, everyone sit down, Dad said, his tone unusually formal. We arranged ourselves on the sofa and chairs like opponents preparing for battle. Dad remained standing, his lawyer's instincts clearly taking over. "I've been thinking about our conversation on Easter," he began, looking directly at me, "about your questions regarding family finances. And I realize there are some things you need to understand about your grandfather's estate." He moved to his desk and pulled out a folder. "Your grandfather's will was complex. There were debts, tax obligations, legal challenges that took years to resolve." He handed me a document that looked official but somehow wrong. According to this version of the will, my inheritance was only $50,000, not $800,000. "This is a forgery," I said quietly. Dad's expression didn't change. "I understand this is disappointing, Aspen, but sometimes families create expectations that aren't based in reality." Tyler spoke up. "What about my inheritance?" Dad turned to him with the same false sympathy. "Tyler, you received your full inheritance last year. $15,000 was the complete amount designated for you. You're lying," Tyler said, his voice shaking with anger. Dad's demeanor shifted abruptly. The warm, paternal facade dropped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I'm going to give you both some advice," he said, his voice taking on the commanding tone he used in courtrooms. "Sometimes when families are under stress, people start imagining things. They begin to believe there's more money than there actually is. They start making accusations that could tear families apart." He walked over to the window, looking out at the garden where Tyler and Madison had walked so happily just days before. "I've seen families destroy themselves over money, children who turn against their parents based on fantasies and delusions. It's very sad." Mom finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Aspen, honey, your father and I are worried about you. We think the stress of your marriage and your financial struggles might be affecting your judgment." I felt Jake stiffen beside me. They were actually trying to gaslight us into believing we were mentally unstable. "In fact," Dad continued, "I spoke with my partner Frank this morning. He agrees that these kinds of delusions can be signs of serious psychological problems. Problems that might make someone unsuitable for managing large sums of money, even if such sums existed." The threat was clear. If we pursued this, they would try to have us declared mentally incompetent. But Dad wasn't finished. "I also want you to think carefully about your brother's future," he said, looking at Tyler. "Has just started a promising career. Madison seems like a lovely girl from a good family. It would be terrible if wild accusations and family drama damaged their prospects." Tyler stood up abruptly. "Are you threatening us? I'm protecting this family," Dad replied coldly, "from destructive forces that would tear us apart over imaginary grievances." Madison, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "Mr. Walsh, with respect, your daughter asked me to review some financial documents, and what I saw raised serious concerns about trust fund management." Dad's attention turned to her like a laser. "Madison, I understand you work at Connecticut Community Bank. That's a wonderful institution with a sterling reputation. I'd hate for them to learn that one of their employees was involving herself in confidential family matters that are none of her business." The threat to her career was unmistakable. "I think we should go," Jake said, standing and taking my hand. "Good idea," Dad agreed. "But before you do, I want you to think very carefully about whether you want to damage your relationship with your family over money that doesn't exist. Because once you make certain accusations, there's no taking them back." As we walked toward the door, Mom caught my arm. "Please, sweetheart," she whispered urgently. "Don't do anything that would hurt the family. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." But her words had the opposite effect. The desperation in her voice told me everything I needed to know about her guilt and fear. Outside, Tyler was shaking with rage. He threatened Madison's job. He called us delusional. Hez acting like a criminal who knows Hez about to be caught. Madison was surprisingly calm. Actually, this was perfect. He just confirmed everything. No innocent person responds to questions about missing money with threats and intimidation. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Now we contact the FBI," she said firmly. "Your father just made this a federal case by threatening witnesses and attempting to obstruct an investigation." As we drove away from the house where I'd grown up, I felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. The man who had taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with my math homework was also a criminal who had stolen my future. But Head made one crucial mistake. Head underestimated how far I was willing to go to get justice. The next morning, I sat in a sterile FBI field office in New Haven, staring across a conference table at Special Agent Sarah Chen of the White Collar Crimes Division. She was younger than it expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of pursuing financial criminals. "Mrs. Cooper," she said, using my married name. "What you've brought me represents one of the most systematic cases of trust fund fraud I've seen in my career." The evidence spread across the table told the story of Dad's crimes in devastating detail. Madison had provided additional banking records that showed the full scope of his scheme. Tyler sat beside me, still processing the magnitude of what our father had done. "The total theft from your family alone exceeds $1.2 million when we include investment growth that should have occurred," Agent Chen continued. "But based on the preliminary review your friend Madison provided, we believe Mr. Walsh has been stealing from at least 8 other families over the past decade." Jake leaned forward. "How much money are we talking about total?" "Our initial estimate is somewhere between $8 and $12 million. The number was staggering. Dad hadn't just been stealing from us. He'd been running a criminal enterprise that had robbed dozens of people of their inheritances and financial security. "What happens now?" Tyler asked. "We execute search warrants simultaneously on your father's law office, his home, and his personal bank accounts. We freeze all assets associated with the stolen funds. And we arrest him on federal charges of fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." Agent Chen's assistant entered the room with a stack of documents. "The warrants have been approved. We can move within the hour." I felt a moment of vertigo. In just a few hours, my father would be in federal custody, facing decades in prison. "There's one more thing," Agent Chen said. "We'd like you to call your mother and ask her to meet you at the house this afternoon. We need to determine her level of involvement in the scheme. Do you think she's guilty? Based on the forged signatures we found, she's definitely committed crimes. The question is whether she was a willing participant or another victim of your father's manipulation." 2 hours later, I stood on the front steps of my childhood home as federal agents executed a search warrant. Mom had arrived 30 minutes earlier, confused and terrified by my urgent phone call asking her to meet me. "Aspen, what's happening?" she asked as agents and FBI windbreakers carried boxes of documents out of Dad's home office. "Mom, Dad has been stealing money from Tyler and me, from our trust funds. For years." Her face went completely white. "No, that's not possible. Your father handles all the legal matters. He would never." "Mom, stop!" I pulled out copies of the bank statements Agent Chen had given me. "Look at this. Look at the evidence." For the first time, she saw the full scope of what Dad had been doing. The systematic theft, the forged signatures, the fabricated documents. Her hands shook as she read. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear to you, I didn't know it was this much. But you knew something." Tears began streaming down her face. "He told me there were complications with your grandfather's estate, legal challenges that required him to manage the money carefully. He said some of the transfers were temporary, to protect the funds from tax problems." "Mom, you signed documents. Your signature is on bank transfers. He told me they were just paperwork to help him manage everything properly." "I trusted him, Aspen. Has my husband has been handling legal matters for 30 years. Agent Chen approached us, having overheard the conversation. "Mrs. Walsh, I need you to come with me for questioning. You have the right to an attorney." "Wait," I said. "Agent Chen, what if she cooperates? What if she tells you everything she knows?" The agent studied Mom's tear-streaked face. "Mrs. Walsh, if you're willing to provide complete and truthful testimony about your husband's activities, we can discuss plea arrangements that would result in minimal jail time." Mom looked at me with desperate eyes. "What do I do, sweetheart?" For a moment, I saw not the woman who had helped steal my inheritance, but the mother who had raised me, taught me to be honest, and shown me what integrity looked like. She'd been manipulated by Dad just as surely as Tyler and I had been. "Tell them the truth, Mom. All of it." As federal agents led Mom away for questioning, Tyler and Madison arrived at the house. Through the windows, we could see agents photographing Dad's files, seizing computers, and documenting evidence of his crimes. "Where is he?" Tyler asked. Agent Chen said they arrested him at his office an hour ago. Hes being processed at the federal courthouse. Madison put her arm around Tyler's shoulders. "I know this is hard, but you did the right thing. He was never going to stop stealing, and he was going to keep destroying other families." Jake squeezed my hand. "How do you feel?" I watched as agents carried out boxes of evidence that would put my father in prison for years. I thought about the families Hed robbed, the trust Hed betrayed, the children whose futures Hed stolen. "I feel like justice is finally happening," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Now we had to rebuild our lives from the wreckage of Dad's crimes and figure out how to be a family again. 3 days later, Agent Chen called with an update that exceeded even our worst expectations. "Your father's law firm was essentially a criminal organization," she reported. "We've identified victims in 6 states, total theft approaching $15 million. He was using new clients' money to pay back earlier victims, like a massive Ponzi scheme." "What about Mom?" "She's cooperating fully. Based on her testimony and the evidence, we believe she was manipulated rather than actively criminal. She'll plead guilty to minor charges and receive probation. And the money. We've recovered most of it. Between seized assets and insurance claims, you and Tyler should get back everything you lost plus accumulated interest." When I hung up the phone, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that we'd get our inheritance back. Sadness that our family had been destroyed by Dad's greed. But mostly, a deep satisfaction that justice had been served. Dad had thought he could steal from us with impunity, but had underestimated the strength of his victims. Now he would spend the next 12 years in federal prison, learning what happened when you betrayed the people who trusted you most. 18 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the house Jake and I had bought with my recovered inheritance, preparing Thanksgiving dinner for our rebuilt family. The irony wasn't lost on me that we'd chosen a colonial-style home similar to my parents' house, but this one was built on honest foundations. Dad had pleaded guilty to 23 federal charges and received a 12-year sentence in minimum security prison. The judge had been particularly harsh, noting that Dad's victims included his own children and elderly clients who had trusted him with their life savings. "It represents a profound betrayal of the most sacred relationships in our society," the judge had said during sentencing. Family trust and attorney-client privilege. Mom had served 6 months in a minimum security facility and was now living in a small apartment in Hartford, working part-time at a nonprofit organization that helped families navigate elder care issues. Her cooperation with federal investigators had helped convict Dad's law partner, Uncle Frank, who received 8 years for his role in the scheme. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Tyler and Madison arrived carrying wine and flowers, followed closely by Mom, who looked nervous but determined. "Happy Thanksgiving," Tyler said, kissing my cheek. He looked healthier and happier than I'd seen him in years. With his recovered inheritance, Hed started his own consulting business and was planning to propose to Madison after Christmas. Mom hung back, still uncertain of her place in our reconstructed family dynamics. "Come here," I said, opening my arms to her. "You're always welcome in my home." She hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart, for everything." "I know, Mom. We're okay." It had taken months of family therapy to rebuild trust between us, but we'd slowly worked through the anger and betrayal. Mom's testimony had been crucial in convicting Dad and recovering money for his other victims, and her genuine remorse had eventually overcome my initial rage. Madison carried a bottle of champagne into the living room. "I have news," she announced. "The Hartford Courant wants to interview you, Aspen. They're doing a series on financial elder abuse, and your case is going to be the centerpiece. Really. The reporter said your willingness to prosecute your own father has encouraged 12 other families to come forward with similar cases. You've started a movement." Jake emerged from the basement, where Hed been setting up a high chair for our expected guest. "Speaking of movements, when is the guest of honor arriving?" Right on cue, the doorbell rang again. I opened the door to find Sarah Chen, the FBI agent who had investigated Dad's crimes, holding a baby carrier. "Agent Chen, thank you so much for coming. Please call me Sarah. I'm off duty." She lifted a chubby 6-month-old girl out of the carrier. "And this is Emma." Sarah had become an unexpected friend during the investigation. When Shed mentioned during one of our interviews that she and her wife were adopting a baby, it impulsively invited them both to Thanksgiving dinner. As we gathered around the dinner table, I looked at the faces surrounding me. Tyler, who had used his recovery money to build a business he was passionate about. Madison, whose banking expertise had helped convict a dozen financial criminals. Mom, who was slowly rebuilding her life with honesty and purpose. Jake, who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. And Sarah, who had shown me that justice was possible even when the criminals were your own family. "I'd like to say something before we eat," I announced, standing with my glass of wine. 18 months ago, I discovered that my father had stolen over $1 million from Tyler and me. It was the most devastating betrayal I'd ever experienced. But sitting here today, I realized that betrayal led to something better than I could have imagined. I looked at Tyler. I got my brother back. Really back, in a way we hadn't been since we were kids. We learned to fight together instead of struggling alone. I turned to Mom. I learned that even people who make terrible mistakes can change, can choose truth over comfortable lies. I looked at Madison and Sarah. I discovered that there are people in this world who will fight for justice even when it's inconvenient, even when it means taking on powerful people. Finally, I looked at Jake, and I learned that my husband is the kind of man who will stand beside me even when it means taking on my entire family. I raised my glass. Dad thought he could steal our futures, but what he actually did was force us to build better futures for ourselves. He thought betrayal would break us, but it made us stronger. Everyone raised their glasses. "To justice," Tyler said. "To family." Mom added quietly. "To new beginnings," Madison said. As we drank, Sarah's baby Emma babbled happily from her high chair, completely unaware that she was surrounded by people who had learned to rebuild their lives from the wreckage of betrayal. After dinner, as we sat around the living room watching football, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, I wondered if it might be Dad, trying to contact me from prison. But when I opened it, I found a message from a woman named Janet Morrison. "I read about your case in the newspaper. I think my brother has been stealing from our mother's estate. Can you help me?" I showed the text to Sarah, who smiled grimly. "This is the 14th message like this I've received since the Hartford Courant story broke. Your courage is inspiring other victims to come forward. What should I tell her? Tell her to call my office Monday morning. We're building a task force specifically for family financial crimes." As the evening wound down and our guests prepared to leave, Tyler pulled me aside. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Going after Dad, I mean. Destroying the family we used to have." I thought about the question seriously. The family we used to have had been built on lies and theft. The man we'd thought was a loving father had actually been a criminal who robbed his own children. The comfortable life we'd envied had been funded by stolen money. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Dad made the choices he did. But I don't regret fighting for the truth." Tyler nodded. Madison says the hardest part of her job is when families try to protect criminals just because they're related. She says most financial abuse never gets reported because victims don't want to hurt their families. Well, sometimes hurting your family is the only way to save it. After everyone left, Jake and I cleaned up the kitchen together, moving in the comfortable rhythm of a couple who had survived a crisis stronger than before. "Are you really okay?" he asked, drying dishes as I washed them. "I'm better than okay," I said. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not struggling financially. Tyler and I have a real relationship instead of just showing up for holidays. Mom is building a life based on honesty instead of denial, and we're going to help other families get justice for similar crimes. Jake smiled. "Plus, you're married to an incredibly supportive and devastatingly handsome man." "That too," I laughed, kissing him with soapy hands. Later, as we sat on our back deck looking at the stars, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 18 months ago, finding that metal box in my parents' attic had felt like the end of the world. Now I understood it had actually been the beginning of my real life. Dad had taught me an important lesson, though not the one Head intended. Head shown me that family loyalty without truth is just enabling crime. Real family loyalty means holding each other accountable, fighting for justice even when it's painful, and choosing truth over comfortable lies. The money Head stolen had been recovered, but more importantly, the integrity Head tried to take from our family had been restored. We were no longer victims of his crimes. We were survivors who had chosen to fight back. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with the choices I'd made, and excitement about the future Jake and I were building together. Justice hadn't just been served, it had set us free. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing the right thing? Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most important growth. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding justice, and share it with anyone who might be facing similar challenges. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to protect people from the consequences of their own actions. Until next time, keep fighting for the truth, even when it hurts.